Hi, everyone. Good evening. So nice to be here. Is it okay if I do this? Is that all right? Is that going to mess everything up? Okay. So lovely to be here. Hello, everyone. I am Kate Hollander, and it's just so fantastic to be with you this evening. And I want to thank everyone at the Grolier, especially Carol and James. Thank you, everyone who is here in the space with us on this raw November night. And also thank you, everyone who's joining us online in the ether. And I also want to thank Alan for coming to Boston in this lovely weather and joining my advanced poetry workshop class this morning. Some of my students are here tonight in person or online. How lucky were we to have Alan in class today and here tonight to celebrate and hear from this beautiful and extraordinary book. I do want to start tonight by acknowledging loss. The recent loss of two poets who were really dear to so many in the Boston area and in this room, Louise Glick and David Ferry. Their absence is felt and they will be profoundly missed. So now it is a great honor and pleasure for me to introduce Alan, not just as an admirer of his work, fellow poet, and I hope I can say new friend, but on behalf of the Waywiser Press, which has put out this fantastic new book of Alan's and on whose board I am very honored to serve as an associate editor. So I think the story goes that in 2009, our editor-in-chief and founder, Phil Hoy, who's wonderful, asked Alan to judge what I think was the 4th annual Anthony Hecht Prize, the winner of which was Carrie Gerald's After the Revival. And 10 years later, I submitted to that same contest, and much to my surprise and delight, I won. And the book came out from Waywiser, and then a couple of years later, I was asked to join the editorial board. And so that has been a delight. And when Phil told me that we were going to be publishing a book by Alan Shapiro, I was really excited. And this really powerful singular book has surprised and captivated me from opening the first page, and I know it will you too. Today, I learned that not only is Alan someone who can craft these incredible poems by turns bleak, humorous, vivid, tender, and strange, but that he is a generous and personable teacher and conversationalist as well. And I'm so glad that we've got him here in person with us tonight alongside this wonderful book. So I'm going to take up no more of your time and just turn over to Alan, but I think I'm going to introduce him in that formal way that we have as poety people. So a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, Alan Shapiro was born in Boston, Massachusetts. He received his BA from Brandeis University and taught for the last 25 years at University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Recipient of numerous awards and honors, he has published many books of poetry, including most recently, Proceed to Checkout, Against Translation, Reel to Reel, which is a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize, and Knight of the Republic, finalist for both the National Book Award and the International Griffin Prize. He has also published several books of critical essays, a novel, A Broadway Baby, and translations of Greek tragedy. So Alan's going to read for a little bit, and then we'll do a Q&A. Right. Alan.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming out on such a raw and, as my dad would say, bitter night. I do want to begin by acknowledging both David Ferry and Louise Glick. I knew David a lot better. David was a dear friend and one of the great poets in my lifetime. And I was going to start with a poem of David's called The License Plate, which seems somehow, I don't know why, but seems particularly appropriate right now. So this is David Ferry's poem, The License Plate, and it was published in, I'm not sure which volume, but it was in Of No Country I Know, that great new and selected poems he published in the 1990s. The License Plate. On the way back from the hospital, we saw a message on the license plate of a car. It said, God has. Has what? Decided finally what to do about it? The answer to the question that you asked, the whole world in his hands, fucked up again, apologized, failed to apologize. The car went on its way ahead of us. David. So I'm going to read, and I have to say that, you know, poets like Louise and David, and I could name many others, including Robert Pinsky, C.K. Williams, Mark Strand. It's a long, and as you get older, the list gets longer. Set the table for everything that I've been able to do as a writer. So my gratitude toward them is inestimable. Okay, I'm going to read two poems. The first poem of this book. This book was a COVID book. I had a really great pandemic. I didn't realize what a gift I had for social distancing. And in fact, I came, as I was working on these poems, I came to think of the poem, my life before COVID as a kind of period of foreplague. And I mean, I'm serious. I mean, I know it was a terrible time for a lot of people, younger people, but for older people, it was actually really a lovely experience. But it also demonstrated my complete inability to predict what's going to happen next, because this book is all about being alone and assuming I was always going to be alone. And then sort of toward the end of it, I reconnected with my old college flame, Rachel Sapornin, and we are now married. So there you go. So everything I say in this book is not true. It was true while I was feeling it, but it's not true now. So anyway, so I'm going to read two poems. The first poem is called Aloft, and it's about the apartment I lived in Durham, North Carolina. And you'll see that the speaker in the poem is just always alone and looking at people, and but not interacting with anybody but his dog. And take my glasses off. And so Aloft, here's the poem. My two tall windows let in so much light. I can see kiln fires in the facing floor-to-ceiling red brick wall that moodily all day smolders and flares up and dies, but never quite, so that it's never altogether dark in here until it's black out there. A cooling one could mistake for calm expands around me as the day dims. I don't miss anyone, I say to no one, when my damaged left hand starts to ache and on its own is slowly opening and closing as though around a hand it's trying to remember till the ache passes and it then forgets. And I'm calm again, or cool, just as earlier this afternoon I didn't notice the continuous slow rumbling of a generator somewhere below me on a rooftop till it switched off, and the inrush of quiet brought it to my ear the way an even keener quiet rushed in when the cries I also hadn't heard were all I could hear when the crying stopped. Each window is a Facebook page the world is doom scrolling down past sirens mixed with howls and catcalls and the shrill beeping of an Amazon van backing up inside a larger hum of traffic where a hey, hey, ho, ho is chanted too far off for me to catch who it is that has to go. By the time I passed them beside the flashing ambulance, the paramedic had gotten her carefully up from the sidewalk and to a bench, and now was bent over her, holding her gently upright, speaking in low tones that the space between us blurred to a parental baby talk, as if I'd stumbled upon a living creche or pietà. And yes, I know it was probably just training, what he did for pay, but even so, it felt just then like there really were no edges to the world, no lines that marked the end of this, the start of that, all of us together dodging and weaving in the chaos of a cosmic there but for the grace of God, at least until I reached my building and realized my palms were burning from the two big sacks I carried, one full of the colorful produce of the season, the other almost bursting with the chickens I was coming home to roast. It darted bird-like, frantic, Bible black around the paralyzing tar pit of the bed I woke in, panicked by the poof and sudden clotting of its here, no, there hysterics, encircling my shrinking from it, the sense of nowhere else to hide, as if some bad debt had long past due, had come with its null and void eye for the eye I owed. The ceilings are too high for the room not to echo, no matter what I fill it with. It's like I haven't finished moving in or out, which may be why I've never learned to think outside the box, especially on Zoom. Every home I made of love had an escape hatch. Knowing I could escape is how I stayed. And now, in lieu of love, my mind is the house I can't escape. And so I fill it up with life-size dolls, and the dolls I fill it with are faceless. And each doll has a name which it never answers to in its own way, unlike the dog I own, who comes every time I call. Once upon a time, in the dark wood of my second marriage, I lived in Chapel Hill, but worked in Chicago, where I would stay with my late friend Tim, an unmarried, chain-smoking, recovering alcoholic, whose favorite thing to do was go to bars with me, so I could watch him try to pick up women, and he could watch me drink. We were, Tim would say, a match made in a heaven of compatible deprivations. I remember how he used to douse his feet with baby powder so they wouldn't stink, though they always did. He'd leave all through the flat a trail of spectral footprints, which now I track in every dream of him, here in Durham, North Carolina, in this apartment, back and forth across each room. He seems, when I enter, to have just this second left. The fake fire in the real fireplace is made of red and yellow strips of cellophane, lit up from beneath fake logs and blown by a fan to a chilly flicker I nonetheless move close to every day at drink time, where sip by sip they come to keep me company in silence, all the old friends who are friends no longer, each fallen away or fallen out with Palamine, best bud, wingman, and sidekick, my one-time boon companion, without whom life was unthinkable for a while, intimate as romance and as frail. They come now not to speak, not to look at me, and the not looking, not speaking, is a dense unairing of their plaints and charges, like mute furies at a deaf and dumb assizes, whose judgment has no appeal before these puny flaps and freaks of cellophane inside a heatless hearth. Most of the books on the wall of books are pushed too far back on the shelves to catch the hour or so of morning light that moves slantwise down across them so that only a few spines stand out briefly as keener greens, sharper reds and browns, and even the blacker ones turn for a moment brightly black among the merely so. Turning, you could say, the way a plant does, as if something older than words or pages, some light-stirred chlorophyllic trace from deep inside them were beginning to awaken, and you could smell the leaves. Outside, there's a crumpled unrest of flyers and mad horn blasts down the street and past the building, on, and yet from up here, and once it's passed, and all through its long subsidence, you could think it's almost restful, something even soothing even. It's a kind of poison, surely, the big picture, the long view that turns great squalls of outrage to confetti littering a noiseless street. All night long, there's a party in the next apartment. Everyone's carousing, singing, but the individual voices, by the time they get to me through the walls, are blunted to a group voice that is pure John Cage, clogged atonally with hooch and cake. A corporate belting out of joy so sloppily sincere, it might be touching if it weren't so late. Oh, come off it. It's all a load of self-applauding, self-exonerating crap. This group allergic, comic, melancholic clinging to particulars when all you think of in their presence is the icy silence of the tomb. Anyway, tonight there is no silence, and the joy is general, and it isn't yours. It's the last section. To the next occupant. You'll never hear of me, and you won't read this, and you'll never know the painted over, buffed, and freshly polished void of me is how this now no longer living hand, not warm, incapable of any grasping, will be reaching for you from the icy echoes of the room. Wide open, empty, everywhere I'm not. Look, even now, it holds you, what you'll never feel, feeling it all over. Okay, so that's that poem, and that's the first poem in this book. And then the last poem, which I would like to say is the comic relief, but isn't. It's called Phantom Limb, and it's just a kind of series of riffs on the idea of a phantom limb, including the mind, the brain as a phantom limb. And so it's in different numbered sections. So I'll read them out, and then that's all I'm going to read. And then, you know, if you have any questions, happy to answer them. So this is called Phantom Limb. 1. After he'd lost an arm in the Battle of Tenerife, Lord Nelson used to claim he'd thereby proven the afterlife exists. If my arm can have a ghost, he liked to say, so can the rest of me. Which makes me wonder, would he have even known the limb was missing if he'd been blinded too? 2. Mind. What thinks this is a kind of phantom limb. It feels but can't be felt. It can't be seen or touched, weighs nothing, and it's somehow bound to, while not exactly anywhere exactly in, this chemical electro froth of focus on absences that make it what it is. 3. And there are different figures in this poem, and this one is my grandmother, and there'll be a lot of different people come in and out. So anyway, number 3. She haunted the room she lived in while she lived in it. And now my haunting of it makes it more alive than anywhere I've lived. From the arm of the armchair hangs a frayed sack filled with TV guides scissors, pencils, checkbook, beside which on the side table, next to a saucer of charred stubs, the lid of a pack of Winstons is flipped back like an open casket on a last smoke. Always within reach, and closer a can of Tab, and closer still the ruby-tinted bowl of hard candy that like a magic bowl grown fuller the more she takes from it, to keep me up late with her, even on school nights, in the windowless cell of a bedroom that was living room for her, and day and night room too, and sight of trespass and indulgence I'm never blamed for, since she's the adult, she should know better. Over the throne-like chair, a cone of lamplight dims as it seeps down through smoke bands blued by the black and white light of a late-night talk show, drowning out the never-ending pox she's calling down on everybody's miserable head but mine. I'm just like her, she tells me, not like them. 2 peas in a pod, the two of us, while she offers me another and still another righteous sucker whose red and white stripes glitter like miniature pinwheels, every one of which I still hear saying, take, eat, no need to notice what you don't yet feel. Let the snow of cellophane that falls through ash and smoke lie crumpled, sheenless at our feet. Sonny boy, it's all hard candy in your mouth tonight. Taste it. Taste it growing sweeter as it shrinks. Suck on that. 4. After the brain surgery, the left side of my brother's field of vision, which is to say the left side of the world, had disappeared so thoroughly, it wasn't like the left side had just gone black, or like he saw just black when he would turn left, but that there was no concept of a left in his brain. So in a sense, nothing for him had ever really changed. He couldn't miss what he didn't know was missing, even though if you were standing off to his left and spoke to him, he'd have to turn right and keep turning in a slow, spasmodic, stumbling pirouette till you appeared. 5. Always when I'm reading, Sammy, by the way, is my dog, was my dog. Always when I'm reading and it's time to take him out, Sammy will sit directly in front of me and stare so quietly with such complete and utter concentration that the staring is itself a force his eyes give off, a force I swear I can feel firing across the gap between us as between one synapse and another. And suddenly, it's like I've wakened from a sleepwalk to discover I've put down the book, and at the door I'm fumbling with the leash as if unsure which end of it is mine. 6. If just now, as I stepped downstairs, there hadn't been one less stare than my brain believed there was, there would have been no too sudden floor to startle me and stumble over into writing this. 7. There was this blessed side effect of the oxygen starvation Tim's brain experienced on his last day, which somehow filled him with this euphoric sense of being fast at work composing what he called an ode he thought it best not to recite to us until he'd gotten it right. So there he lay, eyes shut, face smiling beatifically, as if the luscious cluster of the vine upon his mouth did crush the wine, the while he waved the baton of a finger to the music he now only had to listen to make, before the terminal restlessness and sweat and chills came on so fast that only the slightest trace of terror pried his blank eyes open as if to ask us what we thought. 8. I'm like the watchman on the palace roof, dog-tired, sleepless, terrified to sleep, certain this can't end well, uncertain how. I'm just like him, or would be, if he had an inkling that the roof he's lying on night after night for 10 years, snout to paws, is in an old play, based on an older story, only written down some centuries after, having been a song anonymous singers known as Homer sang about a war fought even centuries earlier, if at all. A phantom watchfulness, uneasy and foreboding, made entirely of words across a page that's always being turned. 9. On the last day, having been asleep for days, it wasn't that Beth woke and started singing Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, but that she started singing in her sleep, eyes shut, voice phlegmy, almost underwater, the song unconscious as a heartbeat or digestion, or the cold sweat she started sweating when the breathing and the singing stopped. And if it's true, the brain unconsciously projects a schema of the body all around the body, doing what we do before we do it. So the present is already nanoseconds in the past, and the future just a holographic deja vu we think we've actually lived through. Does that make anything at all about that last day's final moment more unreal, when all she wanted was a little water, even though by then she couldn't swallow, being by then too weak, too dry to swallow? And if it had been just a simulation, would that have made a difference to the way our vexed, contentious history of misalignments dwindled to the sponge end of a swab I oh so gently brushed her lips, her tongue with, just enough to give her a last sensation of relief, if not quite pleasure? Or how my gentleness so caught me unawares, I wasn't sure I heard her saying, thank you, till the scene, long after she was dead and buried, had played itself back so often I could hear whatever it was back then I might have missed. 11. And the person in this poem, Bob, is Bob Richardson, who was Annie Dillard's husband, who's a great biographer and a great man. 11. I don't remember what it was I said that made Bob think of this, or that last night we didn't know would be, sorry, I'm going to start over. I don't remember what it was I said that made Bob think of this on that last night we didn't know would be our last. But now, as he exhales and the smoke rings rise and wobble as they disperse, he's telling me about a dream of Emerson's, in which he's floating at will in the great ether, seeing Earth far enough away to be no bigger than an apple, and how an angel takes the apple in his hand and brings it to him, saying, "This thou must eat." And so Emerson says, I ate the world. Bob calls it a re-envisioning of the fruit of that forbidden tree whose mortal taste brought death into the world and all our woe, to a kind of globalized communion wafer. Then he says, pretty to think so, isn't it? And laughs in disbelief or longing, I can't tell which. And so I ask him what Emerson would have made of the new cosmology, of quantum fields, the multiverse, string theory. Oh, he says, exhaling slowly, sadly, I think, as if the smoke were the thought itself thinning away from us. He'd have embraced the notion of everything as nothing more than strings that tremble in a giant web. I try envisioning that web, but all I see nearby, half in, half out beyond the porch light, is how the end branch, which a bird has flown from, is trembling for a moment until it doesn't, with the force of what's no longer there. and 12. This is the last section. The way the old inch out into the water, bent over, flicking such little handfuls of chill against the jiggling rolls and swags of arm and belly fat, you'd almost think they're trying not to make the cold less cold, but to make the shock of it last longer. Just so, I'm wading out into an alien element on the impossible to pinpoint shifting margin of it as it ebbs and flows, where every day another wave whelms up and crashes over, leaving in its wake a shocked awareness of a deepening cold only the dead are used to. Not getting used to it is how I know I'm here. So, thanks.
Thank you so much. That was amazing. So I'm here just to facilitate a little bit of a question and answer. I have questions, you have answers. So if other people don't, we can just talk, but maybe I'll open it up to the floor first, and anybody who wants to speak, just let us know by raising your hand.
Yes.
So one of my favorite past lines from the Bible is the King James version of Song of Songs. Catch us, the little foxes that spoil the vineyard. And your poetry tonight has some of that same joy in trouble that goes with that line. Thank you very much.
That's a beautiful, well, I mean, would it were true, you know, it's great. That's a beautiful comment. A great comment. You know, David Ferry, if you don't mind my invoking someone who is a dear friend to many people that are in this room right now, has in one of his early poems, he says that writing is a way of being happy, you know, and writing is a way of being happy, even if what you're writing about is how unhappy you are. There has to be that joy, there has to be that pleasure, there has to be that something else, no matter what the content is. And so that, thank you for that comment. And anybody else?
I'm sure you're thinking of all the amazing questions you want to ask. But I have one while we're waiting, which is there's a poem called Out of the Iliad.
Yeah.
That I would just love to hear and then hear you talk a little bit about.
Okay.
It's one of my favorites in the book.
Okay.
I'm gonna just like sit down while you
okay. Yeah, it's a short poem, not to worry. You know, there are some long poems, but this is a short one. And it's just a Homeric simile that I, you know, tried to sort of find a interesting way to revive. And it comes from a passage in the Iliad when I can't remember whose horse it is, pulling a chariot, and the charioteer is killed, and the straps snap, and the horse is suddenly free and just sort of runs off. That's how you learn about the horse. And so this is called, I tried to find, you know, compare it with something that just was like the opposite of that, but still had the same. Anyway, it's a kind of creepy simile, but here it is. The way a hungry newborn's head shakes furiously side to side as it latches on, while the still audible crying in the muffled sucking seems to slow the fading of the hunger, to prolong the pleasure of it disappearing. So the great war horse, as the rein snapped and the weight fell away and the pulling slackened, whinnied and tossed his head, and 3 times pawing the slippery viscera of the mangled dead and dying, reared up over it all before he galloped off the page, unyoked, unsung, free of the gold-studded traces of his name. So it's just about a horse getting free of all of that shit, you know. And I have to say, it's also a kind of figure for being an older poet and not caring at all about what anybody thinks about your work. And the joy increases the less you are looking over your shoulder at what anybody else thinks. So it's sort of about, that's sort of what it, at least that's the sort of emotional part of it, and it's a good thing. I learned to stop worrying about what anybody else thought of me when I realized nobody's thinking of me. So that was a liberating realization. Yeah. Or as another wonderful friend of mine, Mark Strand said that irrelevance was his salvation. Yeah. So, and it's pretty to think so anyway. So anyway, any other comments about anything? I mean, I realize that you don't have any questions because the poems answered every question you could possibly have, but
have more.
okay.
Yeah.
Another question.
Can you hear me?
Or
Okay?
we don't. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things that we talked about in the wonderful time we had with you in class today, or I guess we didn't really quite get to this in class, but we talked about it after class, was the way that for newer poets or for younger poets, reading not just the previous couple of generations, but the centuries before can be so much of an education and kind of open up and illuminate a whole kind of like houses and rooms in a house of poetry. And I wondered if you could talk about that and maybe whether there's influences inside of this book that we might not pick up on immediately.
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, yeah, there's a lot. I don't put footnotes in my poems. I had to say I had this great. I should, because there's a lot of allusions, and I just don't bother. You either know them or you don't, and your pleasure in the poem shouldn't matter one way or the other. But I was teaching a class at somewhere, I won't say where, and I was in the class. I was team teaching with the wonderful poet Rodney Jones, one of my favorite people on the planet. And someone had written a poem with footnotes in it. And I said, thinking I was being very clever, you can't be clever in the presence of Rodney Jones because he's going to out-clever you. And I said, having footnotes in poems is sort of like the phone ringing during sex. Anybody kind of quitted. And then Rodney says, so what you're saying is I shouldn't call you anymore? Funniest thing ever happened to me in a class. What was the question? I can't remember. But as far as the about the past, well, phantom limb, it's there anyway, whether you know it or not. And my argument with younger writers is, you can get to know what's influencing you, or you can just be ignorant of it and just be ventriloquized by the past. But if you don't know it, you don't know, it all comes from somewhere else. Everything comes from somewhere else. And it's in your interest to own every bit of historical knowledge that you can get, because it's yours and it's already in you, whether you know it or not. And that's why I don't understand, reading your contemporaries, fine. And I all did it, but I never did it at the exclusion of my elders. And I don't mean the living elders, but the long dead elders. It was always something that was important to me. And it breaks and I can't help but think social media has something to do with the atrophying of any historical perspective, where your sense of history is reduced to a news feed at the bottom of a Facebook post. That's poetry is all about the language, all the way back to its Indo-European roots. It's your job to know all about it because it's you, no matter whether you're African American, Asian American, Jewish. If you're writing in English, you own that. You may as well know about it. It's not going to hurt you to know everything you can to know about it. It's only going to make you more interesting and different and more original to know, to have a greater sense of where things come from. But, that's not, however, if you haven't, I don't want to generalize, but a lot of, MFA students, they don't read anything that wasn't written before last Tuesday, and that's a shame. It's too bad. That's why so much of it just sounds the same, because they're all imitating each other. Imitate someone who's different. that would be a good thing to do. Yeah.
I was really, I found it relatable, which is what I hate, but.
No, I like the
I
word.
related to when you said you discovered that you had better social distance and that it freed you up. My sense was that you said it freed up your writing in some way.
It did. It totally
Can you
did.
talk more about that and what do you think now of what you were liberated from pre-pandemic and have you kept yourself liberated?
I can't. Look, first of all, I don't want to speak in absolutes because I'm not entirely liberated. I'll never be entirely liberated. So I'm still I'm not above any kind of petty thinking. I'm beneath it. I don't want you to get the wrong impression. I can remember when my kids were little, my son and daughter, and they were fighting over the controller for the TV. And my daughter said to my son, Nat, if you give me the controller, I'll give you a Pulitzer Prize. I wonder, where did he get that? She's 3 years old. Whoa, that was a wake-up call for me, thinking a little bit too much about shit like that, and so I have, I have listened, my elders, have had a whole lot more success than I had. It was a different world. People like even, Robert, Charlie Williams, Mark Strand, that all had, they all lived at a time when it was just the literary culture was different, and they were great poets. Believe me, don't get me wrong. I love their work. Their work is, but they, but all of them, get to a point where they think, fuck that. I don't care about what anybody thinks. I'm just going to do what I do. And as Mark said to me once, I am embracing my irrelevance. It's my salvation. And I don't think you can flourish as a writer unless you embrace your irrelevance. Because if you don't, you've got your ear out, and you're just trying to kind of hold your finger up and think, how can I, and it's hard to do. And I don't, listen, I'm as vulnerable to that as anybody. I told Dan Tobin that I wouldn't tell this story. And Elizabeth Ferry, I hope I don't offend anybody, because, David Ferry and I were both, I was a finalist for the national book. One time he happened to, timing, bewilderment. I've blurb on the book, greatest book ever written, right? And then so he's a finalist, I'm a finalist for and we have a mutual friend, Tom Slay, who called me and said, he's a good friend of David's, devoted to David, as in fact, I don't think David had more devoted readers than me and Tom. And he said, Alan, I hope you win, but his wife just died of Alzheimer's. The book is about Alzheimer's. He's 89 years old. And my response to Tom was, some guys have all the luck. And I think, I am not above anything. I am beneath it all. So, but I know what I should be above. I have a really keen sense of, yeah. You're just admitting. I am just admitting it. Yeah, I am definitely admitting it. Yeah. So anyway, any other questions about anything? Yes. Oh, yeah. Go ahead, Fiona.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for coming to our class.
Oh, I loved it.
Awesome.
I loved it. Yeah.
And kind of going back to your answer to the last question, do you have a book recommendation for us young poets, or something that you suggest we use?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I could just name people that are in this room, like books that you should read. Anything by Robert Pinsky, anything by Dan Tobin. David Rivard has a new book with what's the president? Arison. Great book. Tom Daly is a fabulous poet. Yes, there's Yeah, there's a lot of really good poets, and many of them are in this room right now. But you should read as much as you can, because it's just a way of learning what's there to do.
Not the really old.
Yes,
She may have meant.
Oh, you meant the older?
whatever the person who asked the other question meant, you've talked about how important the remote past
Yeah.
would be. Who are the poets before the 20th century
Oh, well,
that you recommend to a young poet?
the young poet? Okay, that's great. Well, obviously, you poets, Emily Dickinson, of course, Walt Whitman. If you want to know where a lot of things in the 20th century came from, you read Walt Whitman. My love, I loved Samuel Johnson. I love Samuel Johnson. I love John Dryden. I love Robert's the Renaissance guy, but I love all the Sir Walter Raleigh, Thomas Wyatt, Ben Jonson. Ben Jonson, you can't do any better than that. And then there's also Shakespeare is pretty good. But I would also go back further. One of the best things that ever happened to me was being asked to co-edit the Oxford University series in Greek tragedies in new translation. And in fact, it's an interesting story. I was co-editing it with Peter Burian, who was a classicist at Duke University, and the whole thing about that program was and Arrowsmith, Bill Arrowsmith, was the founder of it actually, but when he died, then it kind of disappeared, and then it was brought back. You pair up a Greek scholar, with a poet, so that the translation is responsible to the original text, but that the poet gets to sort of make it come alive in English. Robert Pinsky was supposed to do that, the Oresteia. He was the person who was going to do it, and then he was appointed poet laureate, and so he had to back out. And so Peter asked me if I wanted to do it, and I'd never done anything like that. I don't have Greek, I don't have Latin, I don't know. I was just like poetry in English, and I said, sure, why not? And so we did that, and that was one of the greatest things that ever happened to me. Was spending 8 or 9 years translating that trilogy, the Oresteia. Strange, learning how different and how, but I learned all kinds of things about rhetoric that I didn't know, and registers of feeling that coincide with that rhetoric. It was a really great experience. So the further away you can get from what you know, the more interesting what you're reading is going to be. So I would just say you should read your contemporaries, but you should also, go, read African poetry, read Asian poetry, read Persian anything, Arabic poetry, anything that's outside what because you'll only increase your expressive resources. That's all it's going to do. It's just add. It's not going to take anything away from what you already know how to do. It's just going to add to it. Which is a good thing, which is always a good thing. And it'll make it less likely that you'll end up repeating yourself over and over again, because you'll have a wider variety of influences to draw from. Yeah. You were going to say something?
Yeah, I'm fascinated by this thread in the questioning about, and that you talked about, of not caring what other people think.
Yeah.
Which struck me as really interesting in the realm of poetry, because it seems like such an inherently communicative art.
Totally.
And
Absolutely.
so I'm wondering how you balance this desire to not give a damn what anybody thinks, but also to communicate with the reader.
That's a great observation and question. It is a totally communal, collaborative art. I did not learn anything on my own. It was always through the help of other people. So, and even now, I have had a few readers over the years, and when I read readers, I mean like an audience, like your audience, the person you write for, whose opinion, judgment you trust, and who you internalize. I have, they're sort of dropping. They were all older, there's Robert, there was Charlie Williams, who I I don't think that either he or I had written a poem over 20 years that I didn't see in process, or a poem that he wrote that I didn't, or that I wrote that he didn't see in process. Right now, it's sort of dwindled to, I've got Tom Slay as my one ideal reader. There's got to be an audience. It's not. When I say I don't care about the kind of Pope is stuff, and or I try not to care about it. Let me put it that way. But it is totally communal, and I am always wanting to make sure that what I'm writing is somehow getting across to somebody else, but it has to be a certain somebody. It can't just be anybody. And it has to be somebody who also sort of knows, where my poems come from, and where in the past I'm sort of dragging into it, even into the present. And we were talking about this today. If you don't know anything about, and I'm not saying that everybody should know anything about meter, or kind of traditional meter, even though it's been around for a few thousand years, and free verse has only been around for, kind of 100. That I'm not making a judgment there. But I'm just saying. But if you don't know, I had somebody tell me I gave a class at Warren Wilson about prosody. And I was just trying to give him a practical skill, how to read poems that were written in rhyme and meter, that were written before the 20th century, and just sort of give basic, like in Robert's great book, The Sounds of Poetry in English, same kind of thing, non-dogmatic, just to introduce you to that. And someone said, well, doesn't someone in the class, a young person said, well, wasn't the iamb invented by white men during the Renaissance? Yeah, and I thought, oh man, I don't know, this is not going to go. This is not going well. I don't know, and I said, no, well, really wasn't. It sort of goes back to the Indo-European roots, and which wasn't white, and was, and that there's a lot of history there. But I just wanted to give them a skill so they could read George Herbert and get a sense of what's going on, or Thomas Wyatt, and so the politics that gets involved in this is kind of annoying. And we live in a highly, you may not have noticed, but we live in a very polarized time. Everything is politicized, which, everything is drenched in politics. I get that, but that doesn't mean that politics is the final story about everything, and and I have a feeling, again, this is now I'm showing my age, but it's a daunting thing when I want to learn, when someone tells you got to learn everything, and you think, I'm never going to learn everything, so let me rationalize my not knowing it by saying it's not worth knowing. And that's what I think is happening in a lot of places. Like, well, I don't have time for that, and I'm not going to do it. And anyway, they're just a bunch of racist white dead men and whatever. And I think it doesn't matter who they were or what their political beliefs were. They produced the language that you are using to express the most intimate things about your life. And you need to know as much about that language and that history as you can in order to be fully aware and alert to that, so that the work about yourself is going to be as responsive as it possibly can, because otherwise you're going to be ventriloquized by people that have been dead for hundreds of years. Someone said you can't get out. Someone in a class of mine said you can't get you can't write outside. You can't, you can't go out. You have to stay in your lane. Culturally, linguistically, you got to stay in your lane. And we were talking about a wonderful poem by Gwendolyn Brooks about it was a persona poem in the voice of the wife of the man who killed Emmett Till. It's a great poem, great, incredible work of empathy and understanding. And I said, you all ought to do that. You should feel free to write about from any perspective. If you do it, most of the time it's going to be a disaster. But if you do your due diligence, and you take all of these influences as teachers, not as, I'm not writing from the perspective of so-and-so in order to teach them something, but in order to learn something, you should do that. And the kid who was a Vietnamese American poet, published many books, and he said, well, I could do that, but you can't because you're part of the white power structure. And it wouldn't be, and he said it wouldn't be kosher. I said, where did you get that word from? That's my word. You don't get to use that word. It's my word. And to see how stupid all of that stuff is, I mean, anyway, I don't get me started. You're getting me started. Don't get me started. Anyway, thank you so much. Well, yeah. Okay, one more question. Anybody? Yes. Oh, wait. What? I don't.
No, please.
All right.
Process, especially longer posts like the first one, you navigate like a lot of different ideas and
I tell you how I learned how to write longer poems from reading Robert Pinsky, and because if you read his work, you know that you can't tell a story without having to tell another story, and you can't tell that story without it. So every story is sort of moving, and anything can be a portal into the world, but that no one story is going to do it. You got to have multiple stories. And that's the lesson I took from Robert's great work. And so now I don't have the juggling ability that he has, where he can move in and out. So I've been writing longer poems that are in sections, and that just move from, associatively from section to section. But that's how, I mean, I loved, and, another poet, great poet, mentioned as James McMichael, who also writes long poems, and I could never do that. I always admired it, and I was trying to find my own way to do it, but like you read The Shirt by Robert, it's it's a whole, there's so much history in it, and it moves from a kind of lyric to a narrative to the fire in the shirt factory, and then it's just moving around, and because that to me is it's how mongrel our culture is what's great about American culture, is that it's mixed up and impure. And if I can move in my own poems from King Lear to King Kong, I feel as though I'm activating the whole soul, so I'm trying to learn that kind of inclusivity and the responsibility of it too. You got to know it. You got to know a lot of stuff, so does that answer your question? Okay. And you were going to say something?
Yeah, I was wondering, when you were reading like 15 minutes ago, are there still parts of your poems, that you look at and kind of wish you would edit more?
Totally.
So like,
always.
How do you know when, not like to stop editing, but because I'm just going back looking at poems I thought were edited 6 months ago, and
I know. I hear you, brother. I don't know. I don't know what to say, because I feel the same way. And I think, and I'm reading, even now I'm thinking, I could have, nothing's ever finished. You get finished with it, but you could go on writing it forever. But you just get to a point where you say, okay, I've exhausted the impulse behind the poem, and now I just got to move on. But I come back. That's why I try to put things aside and let them sit for a while, because I come back to them and I realize, oh, this isn't any good, but I could repurpose it for something else. And, it's why, the longer you can wait before you, release something to the world, the better it is. But it's hard, and we live in a fast culture, so it's hard to do that. But I share that feeling. I totally share that feeling. Yeah. So anyway, thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Alan, for that beautiful reading. Let's give Alan another round of applause. Thanks everybody for attending. If you could all please move your chairs up against one of the walls. We have some books for sale. Alan will be signing books. Thank you.
Thank God, they're really-
You have fun?
I have.
Good. Thank you. Oh my gosh, my pleasure. Entire I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad it's here. Thank you so much.